Every person eventually reaches a moment where they realize something painful but incredibly important. Respect is not automatically given to good people. Being kind does not guarantee appreciation. Being patient does not guarantee understanding. Being loyal does not guarantee loyalty in return. Some people only understand power, boundaries, emotional control, and consequences. The moment you begin to understand this truth, your entire life changes. You stop chasing approval. You stop shrinking yourself to keep temporary peace. You stop explaining your worth to people who benefit from misunderstanding you. The biggest mistake most people make is believing disrespect happens because they are not enough. In reality, disrespect often happens because someone thinks they can get away with it. Human behavior follows patterns, and once someone feels there are no consequences attached to crossing your boundaries, they begin treating you based on convenience instead of value. Respect is rarely about who you are. Most of the time, it is about what people think they are allowed to do around you. The psychology behind disrespect is far deeper than most people realize. Disrespect is not always loud. Sometimes it arrives wearing a smile. Sometimes it hides behind jokes. Sometimes it sounds like advice. Sometimes it disguises itself as criticism for your own good. Sometimes it shows up in interruptions, dismissive comments, forgotten promises, or people speaking over your opinions like your words carry no weight. Over time, these small moments become emotional bruises. You begin doubting yourself. You begin rehearsing conversations in your mind. You begin wondering whether maybe you are overreacting. But the truth remains painfully simple. Repeated disrespect changes how you see yourself if you do not learn how to respond to it correctly. The strongest people are not the loudest people. They are not the people who scream the hardest or fight the dirtiest. Truly powerful people understand emotional leverage. They understand human behavior. They understand timing. They understand silence. They understand boundaries. Most importantly, they understand that respect starts with self-permission. The moment someone notices that you tolerate behavior that hurts you, dismisses you, humiliates you, or minimizes your value, they unconsciously begin lowering their standards for how they treat you. It happens slowly, almost invisibly. One disrespectful moment becomes normal, then another, then another. Eventually, what once offended you becomes something you silently tolerate. Many people think standing up for themselves means becoming aggressive. It does not. Aggression often comes from insecurity. Power comes from clarity. Confidence comes from consistency. People who command respect understand something important. Emotional reactions often reward toxic behavior. When you explode emotionally, manipulative people feel powerful because they successfully controlled your emotional state. But when you respond with emotional control and strategic calmness, everything changes. Suddenly, the power dynamic shifts. Suddenly, the disrespectful person feels uncertainty. Suddenly, they realize their old methods no longer work. One of the biggest reasons people tolerate disrespect is fear of losing relationships. This fear controls millions of people every day. Fear of rejection, fear of loneliness, fear of conflict, fear of disappointing others, fear of being misunderstood. People stay silent because they think peace matters more than honesty. But what most people call peace is actually emotional surrender. Real peace never requires self-betrayal. Real peace never asks you to abandon your dignity just to keep someone comfortable. When you constantly sacrifice your self-respect for temporary harmony, resentment slowly begins growing inside you. You smile outside while frustration builds underneath. Eventually, your emotional exhaustion becomes impossible to ignore. There comes a point where emotionally healthy people stop asking for permission to be respected. They stop begging to be heard. They stop explaining basic standards. Respect should not feel like negotiation. Respect should not feel like emotional labor. Respect should not feel conditional. Once someone repeatedly shows you who they are, believing excuses becomes emotional self-deception. Patterns matter more than apologies. Words matter less than behavior. Consistency reveals character far better than promises ever will. The first way to handle people who do not respect you begins with something most people underestimate. Stop over-explaining yourself. Over-explaining comes from anxiety, not confidence. People who respect themselves understand that they do not need endless defense arguments to justify their decisions. When someone repeatedly questions your choices, your values, your priorities, or your boundaries, your instinct may be to explain yourself until they finally understand. But understanding is not always the issue. Sometimes the issue is control. Some people ask questions not to understand you, but to exhaust you emotionally until you surrender. Psychologically speaking, over-explaining lowers perceived authority. The more desperately someone tries proving themselves, the weaker they often appear socially. This is uncomfortable to hear, but human beings subconsciously value emotional certainty. The person constantly defending themselves unconsciously communicates insecurity. Meanwhile, the person who calmly stands by their decision without emotional panic often commands respect naturally. You do not need 10 paragraphs to explain why you deserve basic decency. You do not need emotional presentations to justify boundaries. A powerful shift happens when you begin replacing long explanations with calm certainty. Instead of exhausting yourself emotionally, you become direct, short, calm, clear. No emotional drama. No endless debates. No emotional begging. The goal is not winning arguments. The goal is protecting your dignity. Toxic people often survive through confusion. They thrive when conversations become emotional chaos. They distract, deny, deflect, manipulate, guilt trip, and twist reality until you forget the original issue. But calm people stay focused. Calm people refuse emotional traps. Imagine someone constantly dismissing your time, canceling plans repeatedly, ignoring commitments, making excuses while expecting unlimited understanding from you. The old version of yourself may have tolerated it while quietly feeling hurt. You may have convinced yourself they were busy or stressed, but eventually, patterns speak louder than explanations. Instead of emotionally chasing answers, emotionally strong people adjust access. They stop investing energy where there is no reciprocity. They stop rewarding disrespect with unlimited patience. Human beings naturally protect what they value. If someone continuously disrespects your energy, your time, or your emotional well-being, one painful truth becomes unavoidable. They are showing their priorities through behavior. Acceptance becomes powerful when denial ends. Many people stay trapped because they keep hoping potential will eventually become reality. They keep believing promises instead of observing patterns. But emotional maturity begins when you stop listening to future fantasies and start paying attention to present behavior. The second way to handle people who do not respect you is learning the power of emotional non-reactivity. This may be one of the hardest lessons because emotional reactions feel natural. When someone insults you, disrespects you, humiliates you, or dismisses you, your nervous system wants protection. Anger appears, frustration appears, hurt appears, defensiveness appears. This is normal, but reacting impulsively often gives disrespectful people exactly what they wanted. Some people provoke because chaos entertains them. Some provoke because insecurity needs control. Some provoke because emotional reactions help them feel powerful. Manipulative personalities often test emotional boundaries to see how easily someone can be emotionally destabilized. The easier you are to provoke, the easier you become to manipulate. Emotional predictability becomes vulnerability when used against you. This does not mean becoming emotionless. It means becoming emotionally disciplined. There is a difference. Emotional suppression damages people. Emotional mastery strengthens people. Mastery means feeling emotions without surrendering control to them. It means refusing to let disrespect dictate your emotional state. It means remaining centered while others lose control. This skill changes everything because calmness creates psychological advantage. People expect emotional explosions. They expect arguments. They expect defensiveness. They expect emotional panic. But calmness unsettles disrespectful behavior because calmness signals confidence. Calmness communicates emotional independence. Calmness quietly says something powerful without needing words. It says, "You no longer control my reactions." Many disrespectful people secretly rely on emotional chaos. Once they realize emotional manipulation no longer works, the dynamic shifts dramatically. Suddenly they become confused. Suddenly they become frustrated. Suddenly they escalate because their usual strategies stopped producing results. This moment matters. Most people break here. Most people become emotional again because pressure increases. But emotionally intelligent people remain consistent. They stop rewarding toxic behavior. Emotional non-reactivity does not mean weakness. Silence is not weakness. Strategic distance is not weakness. Calmness is not weakness. Weakness is constantly abandoning yourself to gain temporary approval from people who repeatedly disrespect you. Strength is maintaining dignity even when emotions feel overwhelming. Sometimes emotional power means saying less. Society teaches people to defend themselves constantly, but not every accusation deserves a response. Not every insult deserves attention. Not every misunderstanding deserves emotional energy. Mature people learn something freeing. Closure is not always necessary. Validation is not always necessary. Winning arguments is not always necessary. Protecting peace becomes more important than proving points. Disrespect often survives through emotional access. Once someone realizes they can always reach you emotionally, they unconsciously stop respecting emotional boundaries. Boundaries matter because they teach people how to treat you. People learn your standards through repetition. If disrespect repeatedly receives tolerance, tolerance becomes expectation. The third way to handle people who do not respect you is becoming comfortable with disappointment. This sounds strange at first because disappointment feels painful, but disappointment becomes powerful when accepted honestly. One of the hardest emotional realities to face is this: some people will never become who you hoped they would be. Some people will never respect your heart, your loyalty, your sacrifices, or your kindness the way you imagined. And accepting this truth creates emotional freedom. Too many people stay emotionally trapped because they are attached to imagined versions of people. They love potential. They believe effort will eventually change character. They believe enough patience will eventually inspire maturity. But growth cannot be forced. Respect cannot be begged for. Self-awareness cannot be gifted to someone who refuses accountability. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is stop expecting emotional maturity from emotionally immature people. Expectations often create suffering because reality keeps refusing to match imagination. The more attached you become to changing someone, the more disappointed you become when patterns repeat. Emotional exhaustion follows hope without boundaries. Power begins when you stop personalizing every act of disrespect. Someone else's behavior often reflects their inner world more than your value. Insecure people disrespect confidence. Bitter people disrespect peace. Controlling people disrespect independence. Emotionally immature people disrespect boundaries because boundaries challenge entitlement. Understanding psychology helps remove unnecessary self-blame. You begin realizing something life-changing. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to your emotional energy. Access becomes earned, not automatic. Trust becomes earned, not assumed. Respect becomes required, not negotiated. This shift transforms relationships because people notice when standards rise. Some improve, some leave, some resist, some become angry. That reaction often reveals who benefited most from your lack of boundaries. The uncomfortable truth about boundaries is that unhealthy people often dislike them. People who benefited from unlimited emotional access rarely celebrate change. They may accuse you of becoming cold, selfish, dramatic, difficult, arrogant, or distant. But often what they truly mean is simple. They miss the version of you that tolerated everything without consequences. The emotionally healthy version of you will disappoint people who only valued your silence. Growth changes relationships because growth changes standards. And while painful, this process becomes necessary. Respect often costs comfort. Boundaries often cost convenience. Healing often costs approval. But peace eventually becomes worth the price. There comes a moment in life when something inside you changes quietly. No dramatic announcement, no big confrontation, no emotional explosion. just a silent realization that you can no longer continue shrinking yourself for people who never respected your presence in the first place. You begin understanding that protecting your peace is not selfish, protecting your emotional well-being is not cruel, protecting your dignity is not arrogance, it is survival. And strangely, this moment often arrives after years of trying too hard, forgiving too much, explaining too often, and hoping endlessly that someone would finally see your value. The fourth way to handle people who do not respect you is learning how to remove emotional access without unnecessary drama. This may sound simple, but emotionally it feels incredibly difficult because most people are conditioned to explain everything before stepping back. They think distance must be justified. They think silence needs permission. They think boundaries require approval. But emotionally strong people understand something important. Not every exit requires an announcement. Not every lesson requires explanation. Sometimes protecting yourself means quietly changing your availability. Many people misunderstand emotional distance. They assume distance means anger. They assume silence means revenge. But emotional distance is often clarity. It is the moment you stop emotionally investing in situations that repeatedly damage your self-worth. It is the moment you stop trying to rescue relationships built on imbalance. It is the moment you stop fighting for basic decency. People who truly value you usually notice when your energy changes. People who only valued access often notice only when benefits disappear. Human behavior reveals something fascinating. People often respect absence more than presence. This sounds painful, but it happens constantly. Some people become careless when they believe your patience has no limits. They take your kindness for granted because consistency feels permanent. They assume forgiveness will always arrive. They assume loyalty will never leave. But once emotional access changes, perception changes. Suddenly they notice your absence. Suddenly your silence becomes louder than your explanations ever were. This does not mean creating games or manipulative strategies. The goal is not punishment. The goal is self-respect. There is a major difference. Manipulation tries controlling outcomes. Boundaries protect emotional health. Emotionally healthy people do not withdraw to create guilt. They withdraw because reality finally became undeniable. Repeated disrespect destroys emotional safety, and without emotional safety, relationships slowly become emotional burdens. One of the hardest lessons people learn is this: love without respect eventually becomes pain. Loyalty without reciprocity becomes exhaustion. Kindness without boundaries becomes self-abandonment. You cannot emotionally survive forever inside relationships where your needs remain invisible. Eventually, your nervous system begins feeling tired. Your confidence weakens. Your joy fades. Your identity slowly disappears under the weight of constant emotional disappointment. The problem with disrespect is that it rarely stays small. It grows. Small dismissive moments eventually become emotional neglect. Small insults become normalized. Small betrayals become patterns. Tiny moments that once bothered you slowly become emotional routines. This is why boundaries matter early, because whatever behavior you repeatedly tolerate often becomes permanent. Emotionally intelligent people understand timing. They do not wait until resentment destroys everything. They recognize patterns sooner. They stop making excuses sooner. They stop romanticizing harmful behaviors sooner. And most importantly, they stop confusing potential with reality. Someone's possible future behavior cannot erase present patterns. Hope matters, but blind hope becomes dangerous when reality keeps repeating itself. There is something deeply powerful about refusing to argue with disrespect. Imagine how much emotional energy most people waste trying to convince someone to care, understand, listen, apologize, or change. Entire years disappear in emotional negotiations that go nowhere. Entire relationships become emotional battlefields where one person keeps giving while the other keeps taking. Eventually, exhaustion teaches lessons that love refused to teach. The truth is painful sometimes. Some people understand your value only after access changes. Some people understand your presence only after distance appears. Some people realize your importance only after consistency disappears. But emotional maturity teaches something important. You do not wait for regret to validate your worth. You do not need someone else's realization to confirm your value. Your dignity cannot depend on delayed appreciation. The fifth way to handle people who do not respect you is becoming deeply comfortable with walking away emotionally when necessary. This is perhaps the hardest lesson because human beings naturally crave connection. Nobody enjoys loss. Nobody enjoys disappointment. Nobody enjoys endings, but sometimes walking away becomes the healthiest form of self-respect. Walking away does not always mean physically leaving. Sometimes walking away means emotionally detaching from unrealistic expectations. Sometimes walking away means no longer begging for understanding. Sometimes walking away means refusing emotional chaos. Sometimes walking away means accepting painful truths instead of chasing comforting lies. One of the biggest traps emotionally kind people fall into is believing persistence automatically fixes relationships. They think more patience will solve disrespect, more empathy will solve manipulation, more understanding will solve emotional immaturity. But effort only works when both people participate. You cannot build healthy dynamics alone. You cannot heal relationships through self-sacrifice while the other person continues damaging trust. People often stay too long because memories confuse reality. They remember good moments and ignore harmful patterns. They remember potential and ignore present behavior. They remember promises and ignore consistency. Emotionally, this creates confusion because the heart remembers emotional highs while the mind quietly notices emotional damage. This internal conflict keeps people stuck far longer than necessary. Healing begins when honesty becomes stronger than hope. Honest people stop lying to themselves. They stop pretending disrespect feels acceptable. They stop pretending emotional neglect feels normal. They stop pretending loyalty should require suffering. They stop calling emotional pain love. Something powerful happens when self-respect becomes stronger than fear of losing people. You stop tolerating things that once broke your confidence. You stop accepting emotional crumbs. You stop begging for communication. You stop chasing people who repeatedly show emotional indifference. Peace becomes more attractive than emotional drama. Clarity becomes more important than temporary comfort. People who disrespect others often rely on emotional confusion. They benefit when you second-guess yourself. They benefit when you stay uncertain. They benefit when guilt controls your decisions. But emotional strength develops when clarity replaces confusion. You begin trusting patterns. You begin trusting instincts. You begin trusting emotional discomfort instead of constantly dismissing it. The reality most people avoid hearing is this. Some relationships improve only after boundaries appear. Some relationships end after boundaries appear. And some relationships reveal their true nature after boundaries appear. Whatever happens, information appears, clarity appears, truth appears. That alone becomes valuable. You are not responsible for fixing every misunderstanding. You are not responsible for carrying emotional maturity for everyone else. You are not responsible for sacrificing peace to avoid disappointing people who repeatedly disappointed you. Healthy relationships involve effort from both sides, respect from both sides, accountability from both sides, emotional safety from both sides. There will always be people who misunderstand boundaries because boundaries inconvenience entitlement. There will always be people who call confidence arrogance because insecurity feels threatened by standards. There will always be people who dislike emotional growth because your growth exposes their unhealthy patterns. But growth was never meant to make everyone comfortable. Life becomes lighter when you stop forcing connections that repeatedly drain you. Energy returns when emotional chaos leaves. Confidence returns when self-betrayal stops. Peace returns when emotional confusion finally ends. Slowly, you rediscover parts of yourself that got buried under disappointment. You remember your voice. You remember your standards. You remember your worth. One of the strongest psychological truths about respect is surprisingly simple. People often treat you according to the standards you consistently reinforce. Not perfectly, not always, but consistently. Standards matter, boundaries matter, Consequences matter. Emotional discipline matters. Every time you tolerate disrespect silently, you unintentionally teach others what they can continue doing. Every time you reinforce dignity calmly, you teach people where the line exists. Emotionally strong people are not fearless. They simply become tired of abandoning themselves. They understand loneliness hurts, but losing yourself hurts more. Conflict feels uncomfortable, but chronic disrespect feels worse. Temporary disappointment feels painful, but emotional exhaustion slowly destroys confidence over time. The moment you stop needing everyone to understand your boundaries, healing begins. The moment you stop over-explaining your standards, peace begins. The moment you stop arguing with people committed to misunderstanding you, clarity begins. Emotional freedom often starts quietly. It begins with one decision, one boundary, one moment where you finally say internally, enough is enough. There is deep power in calm self-respect. No performance, no revenge, no cruelty, no emotional warfare, just quiet certainty, quiet confidence, quiet distance when necessary. And strangely, this kind of emotional strength unsettles disrespectful people more than anger ever could. Because anger feels temporary, but calm detachment feels final. The most respected people in life are rarely the loudest people in the room. They are often the calmest, the clearest, the most emotionally disciplined. The people who understand their value deeply enough that they no longer negotiate basic dignity. They know kindness matters, but they also know kindness without boundaries becomes self-destruction. At some point, life teaches everyone the same difficult lesson. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to your heart. Not everyone deserves endless patience. Not everyone deserves repeated chances after repeated disrespect. Forgiveness can exist without unlimited access. Compassion can exist without emotional sacrifice. Love can exist without losing yourself. And eventually, one quiet day, something changes. The disrespect that once crushed your confidence no longer reaches you the same way. The opinions that once controlled your emotions lose power. The people who once made you question your worth stop feeling emotionally important. Not because you became cold, but because you finally became clear. Clear about your standards, clear about your boundaries, clear about your value, and once clarity arrives, respect begins with you first.